Transit Systems Knowledge, Basic Overview. In this video, we will discuss a basic overview of how transit systems are set up, the difference between urban and rural areas, as well as the traits that they share in common. Transit systems are as big as the population allows, and they take into account the wants and needs of the population. Big cities have huge transit systems, which may be multimodal and include buses, paratransit vehicles, passenger rail, and ferries. Think of New York City with over 19 million residents. The subway system alone delivers nearly 2 billion trips per year. When you compare that to the rural areas of Nevada, which range from not having transit systems at all to having just very small transit systems, the differences are clear. 85% of Nevada is considered rural, with areas that are frontier, and this equates to several hours of transportation between rural and the larger urban areas. Although there is a vast difference of size and types of available transit, there are traits that they all share. All transit systems fall under the Federal Department of Transportation. There are also state agencies that have their own applicable regulations. If an agency receives non-federal grants, they may also have additional restrictions to comply with. All transit agencies are required to develop and implement internal and public policies and procedures. The public policy must then be published and made available for the general public to view. Federal funding only reimburses a portion of the total expenses, so agencies must find supplemental funding sources. The agency will also need reliable vehicles and perform maintenance on those vehicles. And the agency must also train their staff and offer regular ongoing training. The Department of Transportation, or DOT, is a department under the federal government. The Department of Transportation has 6 sub-departments. The FMCSA, or the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Now this governs ground freight and passenger carrying for-profit activities, and it regulates the transportation of hazardous materials. The FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, which governs airborne activities. The FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, which governs freight and passenger activities. The FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, governs ground public transit and closely works with the Highway and Bridge Development and Maintenance. The PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which governs the development of pipeline projects and the proper handling of the hazardous materials involved with the projects. The USCG, or the United States Coast Guard. The DOT regulates many waterway transportation systems, like the Staten Island Ferry. However, they do not regulate the entirety of the U.S. Coast Guard, but they share that responsibility with the U.S. military. They do, however, regulate the safety and drug and alcohol programs for the Coast Guard. The rurals of Nevada depend solely on funding available from the FTA, so that will be the focus of the training videos available on this website. The FTA has funding and regulations for ground public transportation. Here in the rurals, you would typically see paratransit-style vehicles that range from 8 to 20 passengers, and with an operating wheelchair lift. In many rural cities, towns, or counties, the vehicles are operated out of a senior center and provide primarily for seniors, persons with disabilities, and some public at-large transportation. The smaller transit systems usually provide a demand response service where passengers call and schedule rides and receive direct pickup and drop-offs. Some rural transit systems may operate full-size city coaches with working ramps or wheelchair lifts. They operate on standard routes with some time for deviations or connections with demand response services. Whenever a transit system uses vehicles that meet the criteria of commercial vehicles, they then fall under portions of the FMCSA, and the vehicle operators must then be commercially licensed to operate these vehicles. Funding for public transit falls under the scope of the FTA, whether for a rural or urban area. One difference is the urban areas work directly with the FDA for compliance and funding. State agencies are assigned that task for rural areas. The state of Nevada has assigned this responsibility to the Nevada Department of Transportation for the task of applying for funding and meeting compliance. Most of the funding for rural areas is based on a formula grant. The FDA has a formula that calculates the population and area of rural land to determine how much funding they will assign to that state. NDOT then solicits competitive grant applications to decide how much funding to assign to each agency. This happens one time annually.